Well, it is 9:30 on the dot, and we have such a packed schedule that I would just like to get started. Welcome, everyone. Perhaps maybe I'll give them 1 minute since I see there's a lot of people joining us. Um, Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I know we have people from all around the world. Certainly, all of our panelists are actually, we're all outside of the US. Um, and very happy to be here with you today. We're at 9:31, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to our session titled Global Crises Require Global Responses, Partner with Global LGBTQI Advocates. My name is Adrián González Sierra. I am from Monterrey, Mexico. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am a diversity and inclusion senior specialist at Chemonics International. This is my fourth year at Out and Equal, and I will be today's moderator. Before we dive in, I want to quickly clarify a couple of ground rules just to make this conversation smoother. Please mute your microphones and keep your cameras switched off. This will make everyone's participation easier. And we also encourage you to submit comments and questions in the chat area, which I see that you're already doing. Albert Smith, who's Chemonics Diversity and Inclusion Director, will be helping us moderate the chat. So you'll be taken care of on that end. I am pleased to welcome you on behalf of ChemPride, which is Chemonics International Employee Resource Group, which focuses on creating a welcoming, affirming, and empowering atmosphere where all of our global workforce, so that our global workforce can achieve their full potential regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, or sexual characteristics. I am sure a lot of you might be wondering, well, what is Chemonics? So let me give you a one sentence of who we are. Chemonics' mission is to promote meaningful change around the world to help people live healthier, more productive, and more independent lives. We have about 5,000 employees in more than 80 countries around the world. So we are an international development firm, and due to the nature of our industry, Chemonics partners with hundreds of civil society organizations, or CSOs, to meet our mission. So for the purposes of today's session, CSOs are non-state, not-for-profit, voluntary and community-based organizations formed by people in the social sphere that are separate from state and the market. And if you can please mute your mics if you're not, if you're joining us, that would be great. So very quickly, the goal of today's session is twofold. First, the session aims to raise awareness and amplify particular struggles of LGBTQI communities in Africa, Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean against the unique backdrop of a global movement to address structural racism and an unprecedented global pandemic and economic crisis that are magnifying stark inequalities and have had a profound impact on the lives of LGBTQI individuals around the world. Our second objective for today is that by the end of the session, you will have tips and best practices on how companies can leverage their employee resource groups to build effective corporate community partnerships with LGBTQI civil society organizations to improve access to economic development, justice, and promote gender equality and social inclusion. Now let's look at our problem statement. The work of employee resource groups tends to be internal facing and too provincial in their approach to global equality, oftentimes addressing LGBTQI rights through a Western lens. My claim to all of you today is that ERGs must expand their perspective and programming beyond the myopia of the West to better support global human rights issues. To offer credibility to what I am saying, I am joined today by three exceptional human rights advocates. First, we have Donia Piggott, a human rights activist and co-founder of the Barbados Gays, Lesbians, and All Sexuals Against Discrimination, or BGLAD, and co-founder of Pink Coconuts, a social startup aimed at using tourism to promote a more inclusive Caribbean. Secondly, we have Tashwil Esterhuizen, a South African human rights lawyer who works closely with LGBTQ communities and assisted in securing landmark human rights judgments, including the decriminalization of consensual same-sex sexual conduct in Botswana. And last, but certainly not least, we have Rosanna Flamer Caldera, chair of the Commonwealth Equality Network and founder of Equal Ground Sri Lanka, the only mixed organization advocating for LGBTI rights in Sri Lanka, which she founded in 2004. These advocates will share their experiences as national and international LGBTQI leaders in the context of the year 2020. They will also help elucidate the characteristics of effective and impactful corporate relationships to advance and promote equality. For everyone's awareness, I will be asking the following three questions, followed by sharing Chemonics lessons learned from our cooperation between ERGs and CSOs. So the questions are, why is it important for CSOs to approach LGBTQI equality through the lens of economic activism, jurisprudence, and grassroots mobilization? And then I'll follow with, how has the current global pandemic, economic crisis, and ongoing racial unrest contributed to the dissolution of civil society? And finally, I'll ask our panelists, as LGBTQI activists, what can multinational organizations do to strengthen their partnerships with civil society organizations to effectuate positive change? So with that, I want to invite Tashwil to the conversation. And Tashwil, my question to you again, why is it important for CSOs to approach LGBTQI equality through the lens of jurisprudence? And I think you're muted, my friend.
Thank you for the opportunity, Adrian, and thank you for that question. As you were saying, I work in Southern Africa, and so Southern Africa is the region in the south of Africa, which comprises of 10 African countries, South Africa, Lesotho, Botswana, Zambia, just to name a few. And the unfortunate thing within the African context is that we can't even begin to start to have a conversation about economic inclusion because many LGBT people are still trying to ascertain their fundamental rights and dignities. Many African countries continue to criminalize same-sex sexual conduct or sodomy. And this has an immense impact on the dignity of LGBT people. And unfortunately, in African countries, governments use LGBT persons as a tool for political gain. Often during election periods, you would see LGBT people being more criminalized. In fact, you would see governments enacting more criminalization laws as a tool to advance their own interests. So I think from an African perspective, the question should be, how do we begin to make sure that we have a more inclusive society first, by making sure that LGBT people are included in every aspect of our society. And people don't, because of the criminalization of laws, this has a disproportionate effect on LGBT people. LGBT people are unable to access basic services, such as health services. So I think the important question first is, how do we encourage governments to build more inclusive societies in where every person dignity is respected.
Thank you so much, Tashwil, for all of that insight into what is going on in the Southern Africa region. Rosanna, can you share with us a little bit more about why it is important for CSOs to approach LGBTQ equality through the lens of grassroots mobilization?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Adrian. And hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me on today. I'll try and make it brief for your 2 minutes, Adrian. Just to give you a brief history of Sri Lanka, it's an island in the Indian Ocean just below India, Big Brother. We've had same-sex relationships, consenting same-sex sexual relationships criminalized since 1883 when the British brought that law to our countries. Most of the Commonwealth countries have this law. Some, of course, have decriminalized, like India, our big neighbor. But in Sri Lanka, there's a uniqueness, which is the fact that even women and transgenders are criminalized under this law. Because in 1995, the word male was dropped from the text and it included then everybody. So with that in mind, you have this very repressive kind of culture as well as society that we live in. Depending on which political party comes into power, you also have politics that play a huge role, like Tashwil expounded earlier. And repressive politics can often have a huge negative effect on the LGBTIQ community. Now, I think it's really good to be able to bring in the economic angle when we're fighting for rights in our countries, because we have to show that LGBT persons are not these wastrels that are just by the roadside, trying to pick up various people or doing something dirty or horrible. We are people, we are humans, we are very creative and talented humans, and we need to be able to basically contribute to the building of our country's economy. And by leaving out perhaps almost 10% of the population, you're not only leaving out a huge workforce, you're also leaving out 10% of your clients, your customers. So this is something that, obviously we are trying to inculcate into the governments and the people's minds in Sri Lanka. We do have a D&I program that we are running and have been running for the last 5-6 years. But the flip side of that D&I program with corporates is the fact that we are also running a program with LGBTIQ persons to train them, to be better available for job placement and giving them a fighting chance to actually be involved in working and earning and be able to put food on their plates. So it's a many-pronged strategy, and hopefully things do take a bit longer in an island nation such as ours, with such beautiful beaches, and everybody just wants to hang out under a coconut tree and do basically nothing, which I would really love to be doing right now, but it's pitch black outside. But that's the setting in which I live in, which can be absolutely gorgeous and absolutely horrible depending on who you are and where you're from.
Rosanna, you already know I want to go visit you as soon as the pandemic is over. So
you're more than welcome. You already know that.
You have convinced me. Thank you, Rosanna, for these opening remarks and for letting us know a little bit of the state of how things are going in Sri Lanka. And I would love to invite Dania to the conversation. And actually, this is a great segue because Dania has been doing a lot of economic activism for the past 2 years or so. So Dania, I would love for you to share with our audience, what is economic activism, and perhaps a little bit of your work with Pink Coconuts.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Thank you, everybody. Happy to be here. So I've been working in the human rights space LGBT activism space, on, working against homophobia and discrimination in Barbados for a very long time, for about 7 years. Well, 7 years, that's prior to 2017, when I kind of changed my approach. And I recognized that the economic argument to LGBT inclusion and to really, yeah, LGBT inclusion overall has taken me as an activist and Be Glad as an organization so much farther. In the 2 years, so I've been working, against discrimination, trying to talk to churches, we talk to politicians, and we do a lot of policy and development work and so on. However, when we start to talk more to the economic benefits of LGBT inclusion, or the inclusion of anybody really, the conversation begins to change. So one thing that was really moving for me is that as an activist, when you talk about LGBT issues, you might get a little pushback, you get, looks here and there, especially when you're talking to people who are not used to the conversation. However, when we talk about it from the economic perspective, and when we talk about it, especially in places like the Caribbean, the global South, places that are developing countries, especially, we find that the conversation completely changes. And I think given that there's COVID right now, and COVID has more of an economic impact on the world economy than it. Yeah, I think most people would agree that. I guess that's arguable. We can argue whether COVID has more of a economic impact on the world than it has had a health impact on the world. That's something that we can argue. However, given this time, Barbados, for example, I know a lot of people have been hearing about the remote work stamp and so on. And when countries are crippled, especially economically, they need to look at including everybody. And I think that is how the economic argument has come out. And I've been seeing so much change. As an activist, I've been an activist for about 9 years, working on homophobia traditionally for 7 years. And within the 2 years that I've switched my voice to talk more about the economic benefits of LGBT inclusion, the impact has been profound. And while it's a little icky to talk about the economic benefits of inclusion, because really and truly as human beings, we should want to include everybody. We should feel warm enough or kind enough from the depths of our hearts to include everybody. But the truth is, it doesn't always work that way. And when we talk about, the dollar value of LGBT travel to a place like Barbados, or to a place like the Caribbean, or even places in Africa and so on, or West Africa and so on, we're talking about change on a larger scale, and a change that impacts so many different people. So Barbados, for example, has implemented anti-discrimination legislation in the workplace on the basis of sexual orientation. We're trying to work hard to get gender identity there, but that's something that has been huge for us. And the reason, and I sent an email to the Prime Minister just about 2 months ago. During COVID, we're saying, listen, you want all of these people to come to Barbados for the remote work stamp, but you're not including LGBT people, and you cannot ever forget the local LGBT community. So all that I'm saying is that the economic argument conjures up a completely different response. And in 2 years, I don't know if many people know that the Barbados Prime Minister has now announced that they are looking to have same-sex civil unions in Barbados, which is unprecedented for such a small island, so close to colonialism especially. So the economic argument has worked, and we'll get these laws as well as to include everybody in the whole process.
Thank you so much, Dani. And I think the work that you're doing, first of all, is amazing. I love to hear the connection between activism and equality, and the economic case for equality. And it seems like the government of Barbados is listening, and that you have also engaged CSOs have been able to engage the private sector on this important endeavor. So kudos to you and all of your team for doing this. I think there's a lot to learn there. And I also think that given the audience that we have here today, it's very important, interesting to see how CSOs can partner with actual businesses on our fight for equality. So I want to move to my second question, and Dania, you already touched a little bit on this, which is basically, how has the current global pandemic, economic crisis, and ongoing racial unrest contributed to the dissolution of civil society? Rosanna, how about we start with you, and especially if you can talk to us about your role as a founder of an organization that has been around for over 20 years. How is this crisis impacting your organization? And I know you've also dealt with other crises like the Easter shootings and the tsunami, and you've been around for a while. And so how do you see this one as different? And is it dissoluting civil society?
You know, I like to see silver linings, with every dark cloud that comes flying in our direction, and there are many. This has been very difficult, the COVID-19. I mean, one can't even begin to articulate exactly where this came from, and how it happened, and the fact that the entire world has basically shut down. We have been managing it quite well in Sri Lanka. Our government has shut its borders since March 17. So and we went into complete lockdown for 3 months, and we have been managing it fairly well. Fortunately, we have some really good funders who have basically told us, go ahead, keep paying your staff, make sure that everybody has funds to feed themselves and do all of that. And then when we came back out of lockdown, we've been concentrating on trying to do things to basically boost the not only the financial status of our LGBTIQ community, but also their mental health and just to have a little bit of joy in their lives. People have lost their jobs. A lot of LGBT persons are jobless to begin with. And so here lies the biggest issue where, you're caught in a situation like this pandemic, you don't have a job, and you're living at home with people who hate you because of your sexual orientation or gender identity. And I'm not just saying hate, I mean, it's a very, rough word, but truly you feel like that, when you have to be stuck for 3 months, 4 months in a house where people don't like you because of who you are. And you have no recourse, to find jobs, to be employed, and to stay employed. And that's the main thing. And as I said earlier, and of course, Donia also basically said it, the economic, argument is a valid argument, and it is showing its head right now, because we are getting contacted by various businesses, because we have put out some advertisements to get people to take the trainings and start thinking about diversity and inclusion in the workplace. I have to tell you, it's a real tough thing to get businesses here to go ahead and have that kind of conversation with us. But now we're having companies calling us saying, hey, we want more tourists to come when we open our doors. We want a diverse clientele. Now they have understood the power of the pink dollar. So it's interesting. The dynamics have kind of changed with a sort of like a lopsided advantage to us for the moment. Of course, we also have a new government, which is going to be a very tough negotiation with a government such as theirs. And it hasn't been friendly towards LGBTIQ in the past. So, but hopefully it will be, with fingers crossed. But I think the main thing is to know that there is silver linings, to know that there are little victories that come with perseverance and just to hang in there, which is often very tough under the circumstances.
Thank you so much, Rosanna, for your realistic portrayal of what is going on, but also for your positivity.
One more thing, Adrian,
Yes,
if I may, I just want to remind companies, like in the United States, for example, you'll all have this lovely D&I, policies in, in all of your companies, I mean, most of your companies. The international companies, however, who actually, have businesses in places like Sri Lanka, it doesn't translate to our people. There's no D&I once you come to our country. So you don't find our people benefiting from that. So we need to ask your companies, if they're doing business in a place like Sri Lanka, to make sure that they push for diversity and inclusion to be honored in our country as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rosanna, and that call to action, I think it's at the heart of today's session, because what we know is that probably most people who are attending this panel work at companies that are multinational organizations, and many of our companies have no trouble paying for a big float on New York's Pride or London Pride, and there is so much visibility on being part of the movement. And yet, as you mentioned, when they come to our countries, all of that call for action basically disappears, and they silence even our own colleagues who work, let's say, in Sri Lanka or Mexico, and who all of a sudden work in a company where being themselves, it's not allowed, and let alone engaging with that community or being vocal more publicly. Donia, you've had a lot of work with companies via Pink Coconuts, and you have also talked about creative advocacy in times of crisis. So I was just wondering, and you can decide which direction to go for this question, but do you have an experience that you want to share, either of working with a company, a partnership that has worked really well with an international company, or perhaps some of that creative advocacy that you've done during these times in 2020?
Ah, sweet. Thank you for that question. A little bit about Pinks and the idea behind Pink Coconuts. So Pink Coconuts is a platform that connects LGBT travelers with friendly accommodation and experiences and remote workation in tropical destinations. So the definition of a pink coconut is a friendly and welcoming space for LGBT people in a tropical destination. So in a place that chances are LGBT people won't generally feel safe, but we're trying to curate through the local community spaces that, people can come, enjoy themselves in a safe space, yet at the same time contribute to local community. Because oftentimes when LGBT people travel, you might go to a hotel and you might have a good time, but you in no way connect to the local community and impact their lives. So if you do come to a Barbados or a Kenya or Tanzania or South Africa, actually South Africa has pretty good laws, then you connect to local community and you impact their lives while they're changing your life as well. So it's that's the idea behind it, so that we use the economic activism to change lives. And the reason that is because one thing I recognize is that when people ask me, so what is the situation like in Barbados? How are LGBT people treated in Barbados? I can't ever give one answer, because that depends on where you live, where you grew up, how much education you have, how well you can speak, who you know. And I think when you really think about it, your experience has to do with how you present yourself, how rich you are, and what socioeconomic background. I think as activists that we need to talk about that a lot more, because economics plays a huge role in how we see the world and how we go through the world as people. So I want to apply that to activism. And one thing I recognize too is that I know people experience different degrees of discrimination, different degrees of homophobia, and because of that, And because of that, there are different experiences. So there's no one experience. So how do we then use our privilege as people who, have roofs over our heads, have loving homes and loving families to then pour back into the local community, especially during COVID? Well, it's a little tricky because a lot of people aren't traveling as much, but those who are and those who are relocating, whether that's for a month or two, can then steep themselves into a local community, get to know the community, contribute to the community, whether that's holding a training session on something that, software engineering, for example, or coding, and then you are able to take two young people under your wing and teach them for 2 months during that time. So that's what Pink Coconuts is about. And that's the way we feel that we can most impact the individual. Because at the end of the day, I think South Africa is a really good example how laws can be changed across the board, but those at the very bottom, their lives aren't really impacted. If we have same-sex marriage, in Barbados, at the end of the day, that 15-year-old boy who lives in a place that, a poverty-stricken area, their lives are not changed as much. So how do we then use our economic power as people who have the economic power to have fun, but change lives at the same time? And that's the idea behind Pink Coconuts and the creative advocacy that we're trying to explore.
Thank you so much, Dania. And this is a great segue to bring Tajwil into the conversation. Tajwil, you mentioned, South Africa is one of the countries that first adopted same-sex marriage, and you have protections for LGBT individuals in your constitution. And you also mentioned in one of our calls that same-sex love or love for all, it's not necessarily a concept that resonates in South Africa. And you brought the fact that in most of the region, being LGBT is just illegal. So if you're not allowed to exist, how can you be thinking about marriage or anything else outside of it? So I wanted to ask you, how has this pandemic influenced basically the journey for achieving human rights in the region?
Thank you for your question, Adrian. I just want to touch on I want to make a point regarding your previous question. I think that we have to understand why people are economically excluded. We have to deal with the root causes of the economic exclusion, because otherwise we are merely scratching the surface. Many people in an African context don't have access to many corporate environments simply because LGBT people are criminalized. So we have to understand what are the root causes and the systemic problems within our society, and try to build towards a more tolerant, inclusive society. So when it comes to economic power, I believe that companies should use their economic power to encourage broader tolerance for diversity and respect for diversity. Because otherwise because if we just focus on the economic part, we are not dealing with why are people being excluded in the first place. So I think we have to go a step back first and do the groundwork to build more inclusive societies. And regarding your question about how does COVID impacted LGBT people, the fact of the matter is, pre-COVID, we had a flawed society in Africa. LGBT people was already criminalized. Their lives and their rights was already being violated. So what COVID simply did, it brought all these activities out to the forefront. It was nothing new. It was nothing different. The exclusionary part of LGBT people with our societies existed pre-COVID. So for me, the question is more, and one other aspect of for the first time, we had a lot of debate in South Africa, for instance, about the majority and people coming out. Why can't we leave our house at after 8 o'clock in the evening, after 8 p.m.? So finally, people were feeling the brunt of their rights being curtailed, the majority. In my point of view, the South African government has, to an extent, been quite reasonable to save lives in their policies. But what we've seen was, for the first time, the majority of people felt that their rights were curtailed. But for LGBT people, their curtailment of rights has been even pre-COVID. So for me, the question is, Rosanna mentioned the silver lining. How do we use COVID as a means to tell our governments we cannot go back to a flawed society? We cannot go back to a society where people's rights were curtailed. We should leverage this opportunity to go to our companies, to use our heterosexual allies and tell them, you've experienced what it means for your rights to be curtailed. In this 6 months in the COVID pandemic, these are our lived experiences. We go through this continuously. We don't have access, we can't march the streets because of our sexual orientation or gender identity. So how do we use, for me, the question is, how do we leverage the COVID pandemic to build more a tolerant society? We cannot go back to 29th of March when the president of South Africa announced the lockdown. We cannot go back to the 28th of March again. We must use this opportunity to build tolerance. And just regards to the economic impact and how do we use economics, just to go back to that part, it's very important that we understand the national context of every country that we're trying to work in, and for companies to also understand the national economic circumstances. We, for instance, there was discussions when, I just want to give you an example, a short example, about when the Tanzania government were clamping down on LGBT people. And there were calls from the global community for people like the World Bank to step in and to remove funds from the Tanzania government. But the impact of that, many of the LGBT community felt, the impact of that will be disastrous, because the government will then use this to actually criminalize LGBT people even further. Because now they see that you're using your economic power to force something upon us. So I think it's important to understand the context and to not make, and to be very careful that we not use our economic power to force change upon us, to force a change upon society. That's why, for me, it's important that we deal with the root causes so that we can build more tolerance and inclusive societies.
Thank you so much, Tajwil. And you bring up a great principle of activism or international development, which is the do no harm principle. And so a lot of times when we hold this much power, especially for many of us who work in Western big companies, we need to make sure that our programming or even our activism is not it's not basically putting people at greater danger, or their safety is being compromised by something that we think it's a novel cause, but that we haven't necessarily touch base with people on the ground who can let us know if this will actually work or not. which goes to the second principle, which is nothing about us without us.
I think, and this is where it is important to engage with national activists to understand what the best way forward is to deal with a specific issue in our country.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Dashwil. I'm going to get in perhaps 3 minutes to how Chemonics has partnered with civil society organizations like the ones that you all lead for inclusive development, and how we've used our own employee resource group to build these partnerships and then start contributing locally to the causes that you are defending. Before I move to that section, I would like to invite Rosanna back into the conversation. Rosanna, as LGBTQI as an activist, what can multinational companies do to strengthen their partnerships with civil society organizations to effectuate positive change? And I want in particular to also talk about organizations like Out and Equal or the Human Rights Campaign and their Corporate Equality Index. How can we leverage these organizations that already exist in the work of effectuating change in Sri Lanka or just outside of Western societies?
Thanks, Adrian. I think that businesses, especially big businesses, have a very key role to play in leveraging, their stances on protection for LGBTIQ persons, ethnic minorities, and so on. I highly doubt that, if a company in Sri Lanka, for example, like say, for example, a big company like HSBC or whoever were to come up with, D&I programs in Sri Lanka, I highly doubt the government is going to go, oh, hey, they're doing that, let's kick them out of, Sri Lanka. That's not going to happen. I mean, especially now, since there is a crisis, an economic crisis. So there is a lot of room for maneuvering here. And I believe that organizations such as that you mentioned, particularly in the United States and other countries that have the freedom of having diversity and inclusion policies in their organizations and making it a must for all of their programs, to be more forthcoming and to be more proactive about also including that in countries, where they do business with, like Sri Lanka, like I mentioned before. It has been a real grind for us to go behind these companies, and there's always this issue about, oh, we're a foreign company, this and that, the government won't like this, blah, blah, blah. But, these are all excuses, really. Because if you have a global policy, then it should be enacted globally. It shouldn't be enacted only when it's favorable to you to enact it. It means that you're not really serious about diversity and inclusion in your company to begin with. So why are you in the top 100 list of HRC, for example, as companies that have ticked all the boxes for D&I, but not in Sri Lanka or Maldives or wherever where it's really hard to break that glass ceiling? And I'm not just talking about the LGBTIQ community here in Sri Lanka. I'm also talking about women and the fact that we live in a patriarchal country, and even women have the same issue as LGBTIQ persons, not as much as we do, but still there is a lot of issue for them. So all I can say is that, put your money where your mouth is, corporate America. There are organizations all over the world who are, fighting desperately to make ends meet, to push for recognition for the LGBT community, to push for decriminalization and so on and so forth. Our country is one of those countries. And it's a really tough road for us. We have to be at the mercy of, the winds that blow politically to begin with, as well as numerous other issues such as patriarchy, such as cultural differences, and so on and so forth. So help us make that shift. Help us make the shift in your companies, so that you can basically set examples in our country saying, hey, we absolutely, want our people in our company to be comfortable being who they are without any issue, and train all your staff to think that way as well. Once that happens, you will see a lot of doors opening up for the LGBT community here in Sri Lanka, for example, where we can be working and we can be contributing to the economy of our country. And when we do that, they will also look at us and say, hey, yeah, this is a viable option here. Let's give them a chance to be a part of the growth of our country.
Thank you so much, Rosanna, and thank you, Tashwil and Dania, for providing us with such great input. I would like now to share with all of you some of the lessons learned from Chemonics collaboration with CSOs. And when I say Chemonics, I really mean our LGBT employee resource group. I see on the chat that Dennis mentioned that that sometimes civil society organizations are hesitant to partner with businesses, with private companies, because of this idea or the risk of pink washing their own movement and activism. And then to that, I would say that it is essential, something that Chemonics identify as a #1 priority when engaging with CSOs, is to establish trust. Establishing trust is key to cultivate relationships. And when you do so, you have to demonstrate that your company's values actually align with the broader LGBTQI equality efforts and with the values of the civil society organizations that you're trying to support. And so here are 5 tips on how to build that trust. First, and most importantly, you have to show up. ChemPride, Chemonics ERG budgets for our members to attend and participate LGBTQI international conferences, such as this one, to meet activists and actually start building rapport with them. So for instance, Tashwil, Dania, Rosanna, and myself attended last year's International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Intersex World Summit in New Zealand. That is ILGA World. And we've collaborated since then in different endeavors, such as this one. So the first thing that Chemonics did was to show up and be there with activism, with activists. Then you have to engage them. So for instance, we have designed and implemented ERG programming and invited these CSOs to come to Chemonics and talk to us about who they are. So for example, Dania participated in our first series, that what we call Queer Leadership Series, last year at Chemonics in Washington, DC. And Rosanna and 2 other LGBT activists from Ukraine and Colombia were part of our Pride programming this year in a session that was very well attended with our global workforce. And they're basically shared with the rest of my company a similar conversation to what we're having today, in which they say, this is what we need from you. Let's find a nice middle ground to start cooperating. Thirdly, you wanna sponsor these civil society organizations. So one thing that we did after the summer panel in which Rosanna was part of, the employee resource group based in Washington, DC, actually put the civil society organizations in touch with our in-country leadership in Colombia, Sri Lanka, and Ukraine. And we paired them up, introduced them, and said, hey, there is this really great local organization. You should be talking to one another and find ways to collaborate at the local level. So in that sense, the ERGs serve as a sponsor connecting local Chemonics leadership with local civil society organizations. Then something beautiful happened, and it's that we created a partnership. And so because we do international development, we're always looking for civil society organizations to partner with when we are implementing programs. And so about a month and a half ago, an opportunity came to bid for a proposal that focused on a reduction of violence and discrimination against LGBTI individuals. So what did we do? We called Rosanna and we say, we want to partner with Equal Ground Sri Lanka, and we call JFLAG, which is a Jamaica Forum for Lesbians, All Sexuals, and Gays. And we partner with them. For my ERG, this was a moment where the work of the ERG made a full circle, because we finally were able to tell our leadership, this work that we're doing and this investment actually translates into our bottom line. And that is, for me, the moment when the ERGs actually solidify in the company the business case for supporting us. Finally, you just have to focus on sustaining these relationships, how you can build up perhaps semi-annual check-ins with your CSO partners, check on them, see how they're doing, and find ways to collaborate. You can organize fundraising events and really keep them warm. There is a QR code at the bottom. If you want to see in detail and with examples how all of these 5 steps have worked for Chemonics, make sure that you've scan the QR code, and it will take you to a blog post that a colleague of mine and myself wrote about all of this. With that, we have 9 minutes left, and I would love to open the floor for one of you participants to ask a question. So if you can use the raise your hand function, you can then unmute your mic. Of course, I don't know how to see who's raising their hand, but let me try to figure that out.
I got it, Adrian, you're fine.
Okay. Anyone has a question for any of our panelists? You can also write it on the chat. I know there are a few questions on the chat, so I'm gonna go and try to look for some of those too. So Christopher B. Jordan asked, what role can US companies play in advocating on behalf of organizations, but more importantly, cultures outside of the US, especially when region and our customs are usually the rationale that is used to justify existing systems and practices? I don't know if anyone wants to take a first stab at this question.
That one, because I was thinking about it earlier, because oftentimes companies, when they work in other regions or other countries, you kind of want to be very diplomatic and you want to step on as little tools as possible. So I think it has to do with a lot of strategy. And it has to, you need a lot of respect when you go to another place. You respect the people and you respect their culture. So I think the best way to work in helping local LGBT communities is, as you have here in Lessons Learned, is to partner and work with local organizations. I think that's the best way to do it. So you might, export your company to another region, and instead of going directly to government and saying XYZ, you work with local organizations, figure out where they're at, what they're doing, and how you can support them in their work. I think that might be the best approach.
Yes, thank you, Dania. Tashwell?
And I think one should at times also be deferent to the activists in the countries that you work in. Understand that they know best, and that when we come in to provide support, the strategy or whatever must come from the local activists themselves. And I think if we want to partner with activists or local groups, we should partner them from the very beginning, since the idea is formulated, and so that they can come up with the idea and the strategy together, as opposed to coming at the tail end of the plan when it's merely implementing. Because it's very important, and I think it comes back to your previous point about building trust. And this is important, because we need to demonstrate to the activists and the communities, we are not just doing this so that we can actually for a brand and to demonstrate to the world that we've been doing our social responsibilities, but that we are embedded in the cause and that we are embedded in an outcome that is tailored to a more just society.
Thank you, Tashwil. Rosanna?
Yeah, I mean, Donia and Tashwil mentioned, very relevant points. The point I want to make is that if a company has a D&I program embedded in their human resources and company policies, there is no excuse not to have that in their company wherever they go to. It's not about going to governments and saying, hey, we want to do this, or you should, decriminalize homosexuality or whatever. You just tell people, and obviously when you're getting, local staff, you need to be able to tell them, explain to them what D&I means and why a company has that policy. Because it's not just about the LGBT community, is it? It's also about women, it's about ethnic minorities, it's about religious minorities, it's about everybody. So I don't think that it would be so hard, for companies to say, hey, our company does this across the globe, and this is just company policy. It has nothing to do with going against, what your government thinks or whatever. And keep in mind that the laws that criminalize consenting same-sex sexual activity is just that, the sexual activity. It doesn't criminalize us for being gay. We can be gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex, questioning, queer, whatever. And that is not criminal. If we were to engage in sexual relations, that is the criminal offense. So, you're in a place of work, and that's not supposed to happen in a place of work anyway. Yeah. So you don't have to, leave out a whole bunch of people based on a law, an archaic British law that criminalizes their love and their sexual relations, or they are people, and they are not criminals.
And also, Adrian, just something lastly on this point. Many countries, notwithstanding the fact that there's laws criminalizing same-sex sexual conduct, many countries have national policies and national documents that talks about inclusion, that talks about tolerance, that talks about respect for diversity. So companies can often refer to these policies when they're encouraging for inclusion. They can say that the government's national policies are about tolerance, it's about diversity. And I think this requires a bit of homework into what actually the national policy of a specific country that we're trying to work in says.
And just to take off on, and I know we're running short of time, what Tashwil says, the government has already, for example, the Sri Lankan government has already, basically admitted that under the constitution of Sri Lanka, all persons are equal, and that includes us as well. But the law goes completely against the constitution. So, of course, this is a debate for another time. But bottom line is, there is nothing to stop companies from, implementing their D&I in a country like ours. So stop making excuses and just do it.
Oh my God, Rosanna. Thank you so much, everyone. I knew you were going to finish this with a one-liner, and I completely agree. I have my own epiphany here because, as I mentioned, we work in 85 countries, and many of those countries have laws criminalizing same-sex sexual acts. And as you mentioned, that is the act itself that is being criminalized. And a lot of times, because these laws are flashy and sensational, as a multinational, you shy away from the subject altogether. And the reality is that, as you mentioned, we don't need to talk about who you're sleeping with in the workplace to begin with. So there is so much we can do to create environments that are welcoming and affirming, and so much that we can do to engage civil society organizations in the work of your company's corporate social responsibility, or the work of your ERG. I know it's 10:30, so I'm just gonna very quickly talk about takeaways from this session. Number one, utilize your ERG or your voices if your company does not yet have an ERG to raise awareness and amplify the particular successes and struggles of LGBTQI communities across the world. Leverage your power and your privilege. Secondly, if you are an ERG leader, use that power to build effective corporate community partnerships with civil society organizations to promote equality while advancing your company's missions. And as I mentioned, build that trust based on the values of your company. This has been a great session. I am so energized. I want to thank Tash, Will, Danya, and Rosanna for joining me today. I know it's late in Sri Lanka and it's not so late, but late in the afternoon in Kenya and South Africa. Danya is in Kenya right now, by the way, my friends. Danya, I would love if you can share the site of Pink Coconuts, and if Tajul and Rosanna also want to share your sites or social media to be followed, please do that on the chat function. I also want to thank Albert Smith, who, as I mentioned, is Chemonics Diversity and Inclusion Director. He helped us conceptualize this session and also produce this event. And just food for thought for all of you participants who are going back to your virtual sessions, think of one thing that you would do differently after this discussion. You can write it on the chat or just take a moment while you're deciding which session to go next to think, okay, what do I want to do differently? If you didn't have a chance to scan the QR code I sent you, feel free to visit Chemonics website and you can check our blog there so that you have a more broadly understanding of these 5 tips. With that, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I wish you a awesome Out and Equal session. The panelists and myself will stay behind until 10:40 a.m. in case you have any questions. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, my friends. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, thanks so much. I just turned on my video. Two questions. It was really helpful to hear the global perspective. I guess one question I have is, I just became a co-chair of our Pride BRG. And as an ally, I'm trying to come up to speed and just like learn about all the different areas and cultural differences across the globe. And was just wondering if the group had any resources that they would recommend for me to look into, or how I can be the best advocate.
Ooh.
So I think I can take this from the ERG perspective.
Go for it, Adrian.
I really think that something that has marked the difference for Chemonics is the fact that we see our ERG as a space for activism. And so, for example, Out and Equal, as you know, it's a session that an event that focuses for the most part on workplace equality between the confines of a corporation. For us, yes, that is an avenue for change, but we're also concerned to the more grassroots efforts of civil society organizations. So ILGA, the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Intersex Organization, is a great place to go to start getting more familiar with the actual, where are the activists? And what I've discovered is that for the most part, activists are like 20 years ahead of what we're trying to do corporately. And so that has been a great avenue to start speaking the language of activism. I don't know if anyone else has inputs here.
You got it, Adrian.
Yeah, and Danya and Rosanna have served in leadership positions, I believe, with ILGA. So I don't know if you want to talk just a little bit more of what the focus of ILGA is.
Well, ILGA actually, when it was first put together in the 70s, was probably the first of its kind. It's a global, network, I would say, of organizations from all over the world. And their primary focus, of course, is advocacy and rights. But more and more, those focuses are changing and getting wider. And it's probably one of the most prolific global LGBT networks currently, functioning. Yeah, that's, I don't know what else to say about that, but they are a good place. Adrian is right. They're a good place to start. Obviously, there's also other organizations like the organization that I chair currently, called the Commonwealth Equality Network, and it's a network of Commonwealth countries. As you know, most of the old colonial laws, the British colonial laws, included the sodomy laws that we have still, have in place in almost, I think, probably about 15 to 20 countries still left in the Commonwealth of Nations that still criminalize, same-sex, consenting same-sex sexual relationships. And the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting is one of the biggest meetings that everybody gets together, and they have a business forum. And it would be, really nice to see more Commonwealth businesses getting involved in the, push for decriminalization and policies of inclusion within the Commonwealth.
Thank you so much, Rosanna. And Cheryl, where do you work? I don't think that.
I work for T. Rowe Price.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Cheryl. I know this, the platform will actually shut down in about 2 minutes. So I just wanted to have another chance to thank Rosanna, Tashwil, and Danya. This is like the dream blue jacket team. I'm sure Rosanna has a jacket somewhere.
I'm in the tropics, darling. What jacket?
That's true. That's true. I'm boiling here.
But I'm wearing blue and white.
Yes, you are.
I've got your colors. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, you've got the palette. This was amazing. I hope we can, keep working together. There's always the next Out and Equal. I think there's a lot of appetite for the work that we're doing and for hearing perspectives outside from the US. And so kind of to, what's that idiom they say? Like, not preaching to the choir, but basically to follow what I just recommended in terms of the
preaching to the converted.
To the converted.
Yes.
You will keep hearing from me. Tashwil, I know I owe you a conversation. We're thinking of inviting Tashwil to Chemonics to talk about the democracy and governance and access to justice sector in Southern Africa. So that's a way to do that. Danya, we have an economic growth and trade practice, and we actually do have a lot of programs that are in the tourism sector, especially in Eastern Europe. And I think there is a lot of opportunity there to learn from you and collaborate. And of course, Rosanna is probably wanting me to stop sending emails because every month or month and a half, I'm like, hey, Rosanna, we have something else for you.
Yeah, why not? Bring it on, bring it on.
But the idea here is to just find opportunities to connect and elevate our work.
Well, Adrian, just really fast, over the last weekend, Chemonics here in Sri Lanka had this training for, observing trials and monitoring trials. So some of our people from our office went, and it was very, very useful. So we're most probably going to get a unit going up very soon, and we'll ask Chemonics to maybe fund that. Yeah.
Yes, well, this makes me so happy. I wouldn't, and here's the thing, I would never ever know if you don't tell me this. So thank you for sharing this.
But it's good. I was in touch with Tyagi from your office here, and yeah.
Well, so, Rosanna, you know who to call if you want any of the, I'm happy to facilitate any of those conversations.
Thank you, Adrian. And thanks a lot for having us on your webinar. Adrian. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adrian, and thank you guys. I was honored to share a panel with you guys.
Yes, likewise. All the best to all of you, yeah?
Bye, guys.
And stay safe, okay?
We'll do our best. And Donnie, I sent you a message through WhatsApp. Thank you, Cheryl.
Sweet.
I
Thank you,
have like
Cheryl.
5 people that want to move to Barbados, Dania, so you need to.
What? All right, cool. Sounds good.
Including
Fantastic.
myself. So let me know what are the next steps.
I got you.
Thank you,
All right,
everyone.
guys. Bye-bye.
Love you.
See
Bye-bye.
ya.